今天的活动表现了视讯的功能，不止 speakers host 在不同的 city， 我们今天的听众 audience 也在不同的国家跟 time zone 几位朋友现在是在台湾早上6点钟一起参加的这个活动。那今天也是 Federal Safe Distance 最后一天 I guess 4月30号，那就是说明天我们大家可以 hold each other, hug each other and kiss each other。 但是今天大家难得相聚所以今天我们 Q&A 结束的时候呢，请不要马上离开，请大家我们多几分钟，大家话个家常。好 ，OK， 谢谢，交给 host。
Okay, next I'd like to introduce our special guest for today, Senator Ling Zhang. It's my pleasure to introduce her, and she's a fellow Taiwanese American. Senator Zhang, since 2018, has served as a member of the California State Senate from the 29th District, which covers parts of Los Angeles, Orange, and San Bernardino counties. Senator Zhang is here to give us some updates on COVID-19 and her experiences recently with it.
Thank you so much. 大家好，我是张玲玲，我是台北出生的，然后想要谢谢陈会长，他请我来上这个 I guess 算这个是节目。So I'm just going to continue in English because I'm much more comfortable with English. So it is a pleasure to join you all here today. I hope everyone is staying safe. I've done a lot of these Zoom meetings and Zoom presentations. I think this is my second one today. I am working very hard on behalf of our communities in the state Senate. In fact, my office, we are considered essential services, so we are not closed. Even though my office, we have a skeleton crew, everyone is working hard, volunteering their time as well. So I've currently authored legislation to expand paid family leave. I've focused on helping seniors, doing a lot of grocery drives, food drives. I've partnered with our local bakeries to hand out more than 30,000 pounds of bread. And I'm happy to say that one of the bakeries I was fortunate enough to work with is the Taiwanese American JJ Bakery, which many of you know and love. So I'm very grateful for them. I would also like to thank the vibrant Taiwanese American community for all that it's done to support one another during this pandemic. And I also want to thank Taiwan for sending California over 100,000 masks. So that's been very popular with Californians. I know a lot of Taiwanese Americans have also helped with food drives, face masks, practice correct social distancing, or actually it's physical distancing, and taken this opportunity to highlight how Taiwan can help. With that, I'd like to provide a real quick real estate update. So residential real estate is deemed an essential business in the state of California, and for good reason. Shelter is critical for all Californians, but that doesn't mean you don't face challenges. For example, this week, the California Association of Realtors established best practice guidelines that need to be followed during the stay-at-home order when it comes to showing homes. The guidelines state that realtors should not be conducting open houses. Showings should be done virtually if at all possible, and only a single agent and no more than 2 other individuals are to be in a home at the same time during a showing. I know it's challenging enough to sell a home, and it's even harder to sell a home in an economy on hold and the difficulties in showing homes remotely. In terms of commercial real estate, it's been severely impacted too. California has over 6 billion square feet of private commercial real estate. And we've all seen the closing of shopping malls, office buildings, gym closures, movie theaters, nail salons, and thousands of other businesses by government mandate. And through executive orders and local actions, deferral on rent payments, since retail has been halted, has further restricted cash flow on top of the overall economic slowdown. I know this isn't easy for anyone, and as a state representative, I'm trying to learn and understand what is happening on the ground so we can make sound decisions in the coming weeks through policy changes. In the next 2 weeks, the legislature will reconvene, and I mentioned earlier that for the Assembly, they return May 4th, and for the Senate, we return May 11th. And, you know, we have to fly up there, or another option that has been given to us is to drive to Sacramento. And I'm choosing to fly because it's going to be 7 hours to drive to Sacramento. So we will be working on some of the pertinent issues, but most of the legislation we've been asked to pare down our legislation to focus on COVID issues. So we'll see how that's going to turn out. But in terms of this industry, we can expect more proposals related to foreclosures, mortgage deferrals, and property tax relief, but none of these come without consequences. These extraordinary times demand an extraordinary response, but we need to be level-headed. These issues are complex, and that's why I'm here, to learn from you and to understand how this has impacted the real estate market and what the challenges ahead are. Thank you so much for having me here today. And I also want to make a real quick short announcement in terms of unemployment assistance. Many of you may be aware, but I want to make sure everyone knows that if you are a realtor or an independent contractor, you can now apply for pandemic unemployment assistance through the California Employment Development Department. And this is part of the historic CARES Act, which expands unemployment benefits eligibility to business owners, self-employed workers, and independent contractors, including most realtors. You can apply online, file your claim, certify for continued benefits, verify your income, and update your information. And if you need help on how to apply, or if you need any assistance at all, please don't hesitate to contact my office. My office phone number is 714-671-9474, and we are always here to help anyone in need. So thank you so much again for having me, and I am very proud to be Taiwanese American.
Next, we have our first speaker. Her name is Jenny Zheng. She's actually of Korean descent, but her husband is Taiwanese American, so she is Taiwan Shifu. She's an associate with Morrison & Forrester based in Palo Alto. She's the farthest of our speakers today. She's coming from San Mateo. We're happy to have her here. Jenny is in her firm's finance department and a member of the real estate group. Her practice covers a wide range of real estate equity and debt transactions, including development, leasing, financing, and disposition of retail, commercial, industrial, and residential projects. She is also experienced in negotiating and drafting leases and property agreements.
Thank you very much. I'm also from Los Angeles. I grew up in the Northridge area, so I'm also a Los Angelenos by heart. Like Lisa said, I am an attorney. I have about over 10 years of experience in the law, and I do work on lease negotiations for landlords and for tenants. And my work is mainly with commercial properties. I do want to present a disclaimer that this is intended to be educational and informational. The laws regarding COVID-19 change every day, and it's a very fluid situation. Every city has its own set of laws regarding evictions. Some commercial evictions are prohibited, some are not. So you'll have to take this as a general overview of how things may work or play out. But again, it is very specific to the terms of your lease, the terms of the local ordinance in your city. So this is not intended to be applied as legal advice or form an attorney-client relationship. But it will hopefully be informative and helpful. So the goal here is, again, to give you a general overview of, a quick overview of federal law, California law, and then those local ordinance, like I said, which vary city by city, and how you can find more information about the law that's applicable to your city, whether it's the city of Los Angeles, Pasadena, San Mateo, Houston. So you will be able to hopefully be able to find the relevant ordinance for your city and read through it. But again, because everything is very fact specific and changes every day, it is recommended that you consult an attorney if you have any specific questions about your lease. I'll also as an example, read through the ordinance that's applicable to the city of Los Angeles relating to commercial evictions. And that'll be an example of, how to read an ordinance and what you'll see in Los Angeles, which I think is the largest city in the county of LA. And then I'll touch on cross defaults, just the concept, just in case you want to check any other agreements that might be applicable to you to confirm that you're not defaulting in another agreement by having a default under this particular lease. And then I'll touch on lease negotiations, which is probably what everyone is really the most interested in hearing about. So under federal law, the United States has not imposed any restrictions on commercial evictions. They have passed the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. There's a 120-day moratorium on evictions and late charges for certain residential properties that are subject to specific federal programs or federally backed mortgages. And so this is really only applicable if perhaps you reside in one of those properties or you own or manage a property that might be affected, that might be under a federal program. I haven't read through it, but I assume it's something like HUD or a Fannie Mae loan, again, for residential properties. But again, there's no US law regarding commercial properties or evictions. In California, there are a couple of laws that are relevant to commercial properties, commercial tenants. The first one listed on my PowerPoint, Executive Order number N2820. So that allows, so typically California has a civil code that governs landlords' rights and remedies in the event of a default under a lease, the rights to evict a tenant, various remedies under that. So this order allows local cities to enact their own legislation or ordinance which will supersede the California Civil Code. So they've given local cities the right to disregard the California Civil Code. And essentially a lot of cities have done that to place moratoriums on evictions, taking away the right of a landlord to evict a tenant for non-payment of rent. And we'll go into that more when we talk about local ordinances. The Judicial Council of California, this is a organization that basically sets various rules for how courts operate. They have initiated an emergency order that states that the court is unable to issue a summons on a complaint for unlawful detainer unless the court finds that it's necessary to protect the public health and safety. So that means that if you were to go and file an eviction action, file a complaint for an unlawful detainer action tomorrow, the court would have to turn you away, or they would not be able to issue a summons that you could then serve on the tenant, the defendant. They just can't do it. That is going to be in place until 90 days after the governor declares that the state of emergency related to COVID-19 is over. So for example, if it's declared that the emergency is over tomorrow, then you'll have to wait 90 days from that date before you can serve, before you can file your complaint, and before the court can issue a summons for unlawful detainer. So generally for local laws, like I said, it varies city by city. So it really requires, it's very hard to give advice about what to do in your situation. You would have to look at the local ordinance or have an attorney look at the local ordinance. But typically what we're finding is that the local cities are prohibiting landlords from evicting tenants for non-payment of rent due to a decrease in income related to COVID-19. So two things, there must be a decrease in income and has to be related to COVID-19. Most cities require that that for the tenant to have this protection, the tenant must provide the landlord with notice that it will not pay all or some of its rent. They must show that they've had this decrease in income and that it's related to COVID-19. They have to back it up. Depending on the city, the tenant has to give that notice before their rent is due, within 7 days after the rent is due, 14 days after the rent is due, or 30 days after rent is due. Again, it does vary city by city. So you'd have to check the ordinance to see what your rights are if you're the tenant, what your obligations are. And then if you're the landlord, what protections or what obligations you have if your tenant has or has not provided that notice. In order to find local laws that are applicable to you, I tried to lay out some search terms, things that I use when I try to find local laws. So I used the city name. Here I did search for the city of Los Angeles, or you could search for Pasadena, whatever city you're in or your property is located in. COVID-19, eviction, and then you do want to also search for commercial evictions. Some cities have different rules for residential properties versus commercial properties. And when we go through the ordinance for the city of LA, I'll point that out for you and you'll see that there's a difference. So those search terms should get you somewhere. It should either take you directly to the ordinance. You should be able to find some articles that are helpful. It should be able to take you somewhere close. And then if that's not helpful to you, the mayor's offices are pretty helpful. They have helplines. You should be able to find a pro bono legal clinic. There are a lot of law firms like mine that are doing a lot of these webinars, some seminars, pro bono clinics. This is my second seminar on this topic, and I'm sure there's more to come. So those resources are out there for you as a landlord or a tenant. So this is a the City of Los Angeles Eviction Moratorium, ordinance number 186585. So these are snippets of the ordinance. It's not the entire ordinance, but I pulled out the sections that are relevant to commercial properties because I am not covering residential properties here. And so in Los Angeles, so the way this is laid out is on the left side of the screen, section 49.99.3. This is the rule regarding the prohibition on commercial evictions. On the left side, on the right side is the definition, section 49.99.1. This covers various definitions that we'll go through when reading this ordinance. And then section 49.99.5, this basically, the importance of this is that it says that it's retroactive to the date that a local emergency was proclaimed. So the date that local emergency here is defined as, sort of cut off by my screen. Local emergency period is March 4, 2020 to the end of the local emergency as declared by the mayor. So not as declared by the state of California, but it's going to be as declared by the mayor. So this rule is in effect for the period from March 4th, 2020 until the local emergency is deemed over. And that's true even though this rule was not approved until March 31, 2020. So it's retroactive, and that's what this bottom portion is saying. So here's the rules in Los Angeles for commercial properties. No owner shall evict a tenant of commercial real property during the local emergency period, which again is March 4th, 2020 until it's declared over, if the tenant is unable to pay rent due to circumstances related to COVID-19 pandemic. And commercial property is defined here on the right side. And it's important to read the definition because not all commercial properties are covered. The term commercial property commercial real property refers to any parcel of real property that is developed and used either in part or in whole for commercial property purposes. This does not include commercial real property leased by a multinational company, a publicly traded company, or a company that employs more than 500 employees. So if you are a landlord and you fall under the second sentence, then this prohibition does not apply to you. I don't know why, but that's the rule in Los Angeles. It's not the rule in every city, but that's why you have to look at the ordinance carefully. So circumstances related to COVID-19 pandemic, what does that mean? Those are circumstances including loss of business income due to COVID-19 related workplace closure, childcare expenditures due to school closures, healthcare expenses related to being ill with COVID-19, or caring for a member of the tenant's household or family who is ill with COVID-19, or reasonable expenditures that stem from government ordered emergency measures. So, it's pretty broad. Basically, if you have a loss in business because of COVID, you have additional expenses to care for someone, or any other reason really that's causing you to lose money or spend more money, that will be grounds for requesting rent relief, or at least being protected from being evicted. The tenant has up to 3 months following the end of the local emergency period to repay any past due rent. So that means that rent is not forgiven during this period. This just means that a landlord cannot evict a tenant during this time for failing to pay rent. And so they cannot issue any eviction notices or file a lawsuit. Tenants may use protections afforded in this section as an affirmative defense in an unlawful detainer action. And what that means is that if when the courts reopen for unlawful detainer actions, when this 90-day, 3-month period is over, and a landlord then attempts to evict a tenant for failing to pay rent during this period, that tenant can use this affirmative defense that this ordinance prohibited the landlord from initiating an eviction action based on their failure to pay rent during COVID-19. As I said again, as it says here, nothing in this article eliminates any obligation to pay lawfully charged rent. No owner shall charge interest or a late fee on rent not paid under the provisions of this article. So although rent is will be due eventually, it's not forgiven. Landlords cannot charge a late fee or interest, regardless of what the lease says. And then owner is also defined as a person who is acting as principal or through an agent, offering residential or commercial real property for rent, and includes a predecessor and interest to the owner. So that means that if you're the owner or the landlord, you cannot have your property manager issue an eviction notice. It's still deemed to be the owner acting through the agent. So that's sort of an example. I wouldn't say that the City of LA eviction moratorium is cookie cutter or typical of other eviction ordinances I've seen, because this actually doesn't require the tenant to notify the landlord at all, which is interesting. And just a quick note regarding cross defaults. So in some cases, you may have your tenant may have or you may be a tenant and you may have a business loan, and your loan agreement may say something like a default under your lease will be deemed a default under your loan agreement. Same with being a landlord. You may have a mortgage or a loan, some type of agreement that creates an event of default if your tenant is in default, if you're not bringing enough income or revenue from your commercial property. You could be violating a financial covenant to keep your debt ratio in a certain amount. And also certain tenants might lease more than one space from the same landlord. And if that's the case, they might have a cross default provision in their lease so that if they default in one lease, then they're in default of the other lease. So the key takeaway from this is that if you do have any related loan agreements or other agreements, then you should take a look and see if this lease has an impact on your other obligations to other people. And then lastly, lease negotiations. Again, I'm not sure if our audience is composed of mostly landlord or tenants, could be a mix of both. So I'll try to talk about things that are important to both parties. So in lease negotiations, I'd recommend for the landlord that they try to get some particular pieces of information from the tenant before they begin their negotiations. Number one, reason for non-payment and some proof. So, why is business declining? Why are they closed? They're not an essential business. They're, they're just for whatever reason and related to COVID-19. And then proof, financial statement, bank statement. Maybe as a landlord, you're already in the practice of getting financial statements from your tenant on a regular basis. Maybe you're not, but this is a good time and good reason to ask for proof that their income has dropped. You want to know, okay, so the tenant comes to you and says they're not able to pay all or some of the rent. What are they willing to do? Ask them, are they able to pay some of it? Are they, what do they want to pay it in installments? And then you'll have an idea of what you can propose. You also want to know if your tenant has applied for or received any governmental assistance. And if so, maybe they should apply that toward your rent. Okay. Alternatives to eviction. So you cannot evict a tenant, most likely under your local law, especially if you're in the city of Los Angeles and if you're not one of those larger companies owning property. Some alternatives to eviction that you can think about are, of course, you'd have to amend your lease. You can have a deferred payment or a payment plan. So, what I'm typically seeing is that tenants are agreeing to pay between 25 to 50% of the rent that's due on a monthly basis, maybe for the next 3 months. And then after that, they will pay the rest of the rent that's due in equal monthly installments. And they can either start that right away after the 3-month period, or maybe they'll have to start in 6 months. You can add an interest rate, 6%, 8%. So those are, you can come up with different payment plans. Again, depends on what the tenant is willing to do and what their business is like. Event of default. So some leases, some more sophisticated leases will say that if the rent is not paid when due, then it's an event of default. And then there are different provisions in the lease that give the tenant the certain rights: right to renew, right to expand their space, right to renew the term of their lease, rights to do, a variety of things. But typically those rights will be conditioned upon there being no event of default under the lease. And so if they have not paid rent, they have an event of default, they lose those rights. And so it may be helpful for you to document that if that's what you want to do. Document in a lease amendment that they have not paid rent, that in lieu of that they've lost, that they no longer have a right to expand or renew, and any other concessions that you would like from the tenant. You might think about this tenant and think, what issues have I had with this tenant or this property or what updates to the lease have I wanted to make that this would now be an opportunity to do. You don't want to be predatory about it because you do want to think about the long view. If this is ever litigated in court, you do want to look reasonable in the eyes of the court. And so, you know, these are things that you can address now. Security deposit, your lease may not actually specify that if the tenant is late, is unable to pay rent, that you can apply the security deposit toward the rent. It also may not have a provision that says that the security deposit must be replenished within X number of days of notice from the landlord. So you check your lease, see what it says. If you do have a security deposit, see if it says that you can apply it toward rent. See if it then also allows you to demand that the tenant replenish that security deposit. Another option, if you have a guarantee, if there's a guarantor on that lease, make a claim on that guarantor to have them make up the difference. So these are some options that you can consider in negotiating the lease. Again, my last point being, it really depends on the terms of your lease. I've seen a lot of very short 5-page leases and 60-page leases, 100-page leases. So it's really going to depend on what your lease says right now. If it doesn't say very much, then this might be a good time for you to add in some protections for yourself. So that's what
I want to introduce Johnson Chin. He's director at Newmark Knight Frank in the City of Industry. Prior to joining this firm, Johnson was a senior valuation specialist at Colliers International Valuation and Advisory Services. Before Colliers, Johnson was one of the elite commercial real estate senior consultants at Deloitte Financial Advisory Services. Johnson has also served as a senior associate at Duff & Phelps Commercial Real Estate Group, where he sourced multi-million dollars of consulting fee leads during the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. So I'm going to turn it over to Johnson.
所以我自我介绍一下哈，我是 Johnson Chen， 中文名字是简志成。那我从事这个工商业不动产，大概就是从1995年开始。我的 specialty 基本上就是在工业不动产上面。现在我们就是go to next step， 这也是我个人简介。那我们可以先 skip 一下。大致上介绍我公司一下哈 ，Newmark Knight Frank 是1929年就开始，那经过将近100年的这个演变，所以从一个小小的公司到现在是有将近3个 billion 的 transaction 是 globally。Newmark Knight Frank 有不同的 service， 有 leasing， 有 capital market。capital market 基本上就是 investment。那 investment Class A、Class B 的这些 real estate， 还有这个 multi-family， 那还有不同的这个像 valuation。我自己个人本身是 focus 在这个 industrial 和 logistics。我相信大家最近可能都有听到，就是说这个 industrial is the new retail。为什么呢？其实在我们这个 COVID-19 之前，有很多的这些 retail 就已经变成在 industrial 的warehouse 里面来操作。那这个 slide 基本上就是以Newmark Knight Frank 的这个公司的这个presence globally。在美国本土的话，大概有5600人左右的这个staff 还有 brokers。全球呢有超过18000人，那全球的总收入，像我刚才有提到，是大概3个 billion 左右的这个 revenue。那全球也有大概480个办公室。今天的主题主要是讲说工业不动产的现况，还有在新冠疫情影响下的商业不动产租约的新挑战。 这个 slide 其实就是刚刚之前中文的英文版。何谓商用不动产？其实，我们看来非住宅以外的不动产全部可以统称为商用不动产。广义来看，商业使用收益不动产全部都是叫商业不动产，但是里面有所谓的一些细项，例如商业不动产，有休闲不动产、工业不动产及特殊的这种不动产。商业不动产包括办公大楼、百货公司、商场、购物中心等等，游乐园、度假村、休闲住宅、俱乐部，这为休闲不动产，或是所谓的 leisure resort。工业不动产则以厂办或是这个仓储为工业不动产。医院、炼油厂这些算是 specialty 或是说 specialized 的不动产。我们现在来看一下，就是说有关这个 industrial market。那在我们南加来讲，算是全美国数一数二的最大的工业不动产市场。整个南加州，总共工业不动产的 building square footage 将近2个 billion， 就是20亿平方英。那我们来看，单单在洛杉矶县的这个total inventory。在工业不动产的部分就将近1个 billion，1个 billion 就是10亿平方英尺。在过去这个第一季来讲的时候，我们可以看到在第3月的时候，其实在 vacancy 就是控制率的方面稍微有一点提升。那在第一季也可以看得到，所谓的 net absorption 是负的50万平方英尺。所以和前一季有1.4个 million 被租掉，但是在我们上一季有反而多了这个50万平方英尺左右的面积。由此可见，在这个新冠疫情所影响下，有多多少少还是有工业不动产还是多多少少被影响到。那另外一边这个是Inland Empire， 就是所谓的内陆帝国。内陆帝国的总 inventory 量是6亿2千万平方英尺。它的这控制率还算是蛮平稳的。以过去几个这个 quarter 来讲的话，第一个 quarter 2020年第一个 quarter 它只有3.6个%的 vacancy， 所以需求量还是蛮多的。那在 quarterly net absorption， 上一季也有520万平方英尺被租掉，所以在需求量是非常的强劲。这个 slide 是Orange County 和 San Diego County。Orange County 来讲的话，它的这个控制率是3.1个%，和第4季的2019年来比的话，相差不多。可是必须注意的是，它的 net absorption 反而就是说有多20万平方英尺释放出来。再来就是看看 San Diego。San Diego 其实是一个蛮小的这个工业不动产市场。那它的这个 vacancy rate 在控制率也是算是蛮平稳的。那 quarterly absorption 反而是比这个 Orange County 还要好。这个 quarter 就是第一个 quarter 2020年，反而还有20万平方英尺左右的面积被出租掉。现在我们来看这个所谓的 San Gabriel Valley。San Gabriel Valley 就是我们非常熟悉的一个地域，圣盖博谷。那圣盖博谷它整个市场的大小是大概1亿8200万平方英尺。整体来讲 2.2% 的控制率是算不错，可是跟第4季来比，2019年第4季来比是涨了0.5% 左右。它的 net absorption 多了35万平方英尺。 这个其实有蛮多的原因，就是说在第一季的时候有一个60几万平方英尺的厂房被释放出来，但是它随后也是有被租掉。在我们 San Gabriel Valley 圣盖博谷区的大部分的这一些生意是比较中小型企业，因为中小型企业在这一次疫情的影响下，很多人就会要求，就是说这个房东看能不能让他们换到一个比较小的地方，或是把他们的这个比较大的厂房来分租出去。这个图是蛮有意思的哦，在前不久，这个 Visual Capitalist 有做一个 study， 就是说在新冠疫情的影响下，什么样的产品是销路突然变得很好？那还有什么样的产品，就是说因为也是新冠疫情的影响下而被变成就是说没有人买，或者是根本卖不出去。我们原本想的就是说，在 TP 就是 toilet paper， 大家那时候都在抢购，可是在事实上大概只有这个 percent 的 increase。反而 increase 最多的是这个 disposable 一次性的手套。上面这个部分呢，绿色的部分就是说，从大概100%涨到670%，从 disposable 的一次性的这个手套，还有就是说面包机制面包机。那在下面呢，我想大家也应该看得出来，就是说像 luggage 在 travel related 方面，还有这个 briefcase 是完完全全生意掉了77%，非常将近100%。那在这种成衣方面的，像礼服、新娘礼服，还有 men's formal wear， 就是在西装方面，其实它的这个销售量降得非常多。这也所以我刚才一开始有讲说，为什么很多人在讲说 industrial 是一个new retail， 很多这个 operation 都把这个 retail shift online， 那 online 所需要的地方就是 industrial warehouse。我们在投资房地产的时候，很多人都会讲 location。那地点是非常重要，可是，在新冠疫情的这个疫情下，其实房客和房东，或是房东和房客最重要的是沟通再沟通。现在这个 slide 开始和下几张 slide 其实都是一些主要在合约上、租赁合约上的一些我们现在可以常见到的一些房客和房东之间的一些讨论的一些话题。所谓 AIR lease 是我们 industry 里面常用的一个这个标准化的这个合约。那在疫情下的情况下，可不可以房东来向房客要所谓的这个财务报表 （financial statements）？ 在合约里面讲的是说可以，但是他能拿过来把你的这个financial statement 就是财务报表拿来，是只有能在做 finance。在贷款或是重新贷款，或是在买卖的时候，可以跟房东可以跟房客要求这个财务报表。但是如果房客的生意因为这个疫情的影响，而没有办法，就是说继续付很多房租，或是干脆根本不能付房租的时候，其实房客也是要有心理准备，就是说要把这个财务报表还有报税的交给房东看，这样子他们才能有办法，就是说想到底是帮你减租呢，还是就是说把这个房租延后让你分期付款。 这一条就是所谓的不可抗力条约force majeure。在 AIR lease 里面，其实没有所谓的不可抗力的条约，这就代表不管怎么样，房客都是要付房租的。可是，在所谓的制式化的合约下，我这张图里面有一个截图，这个就是一个 customized 截图的制式的客制化的合约。那客制化的合约，它其实是有谈到这个不可抗力的这个条款。不可抗力，其实在这个合约里面，它是讲说，最主要的是，如果有这种情况发生，那就是看这个期间是会被延长多久。假设这个疫情是2个月后才结束，或是3个月后结束，房租呢就是会往后延大概2个月或3个月，看疫情的长短长久。那当然就是说有一些细节必须注意到，就是说是不是政府上面有一些动作，或者是说政府能发布新的这些政令方面的。在疫情下，房东可不可以跟房客收这个 late charge 还有利息？答案是房东可以。不过好消息是，因为这一条其实大部分房东，以我的经验来讲，不管我是代表房客或房东的时候，通常房东是不会硬性规定要去追这个 late charge 或是利息。不过，在合约上是明文写的，是一定是可以对房东的来说。还有在 AIR lease 里面有一个provision， 就是一个条款叫做 inducement recapture。那 inducement recapture 中文大意上来翻的话，就是说房东给你的好处，是不是房客违约的时候，是毁约的时候，房东是不是可以全每一块钱都可以把它要回来？其实，在这种情况下，是房东是有权利把这一些房东一开始给房客的好处，不管是金钱上，还是他帮你维修一些这个租的店面或是 warehouse 的部分，他都可以一块不少的跟你要回来。不过通常我们是会建议房客啦，就是说如果房东要跟你要 full value， 就是全额的话，你可以跟房东讲说，其实我的租约，假设你的租约是60个月，但是你的租约剩下5个月的时候，等于说是你只是分摊到5个月，然后把这5个月房东之前给你的这些好处，不管是他帮你维修的这些费用，或者说他给你的这个免租期，用5个月的这个金额来还给他，而不是以整个60个月来给他。所以这一点其实是很多有时候我碰到房客他们可能不太懂，那反而被房东就是说你要把我以前给你的1毛我都要回来这样子。我们回到刚才讲的在这个疫情期间，其实房客和房东最好的方式就是沟通再沟通。那给房客的建议是这样子，不要马上就去找律师，因为律师也是需要一点时间来研究，就是说你的租约。那给房客另外2个这个建议就是说，其实拿电话打个电话给这个房东，跟他们沟通一下。那也不要就是说马上不要马上房租都不付。当然如果说你的这个生意是被疫情真的影响到，完全没有什么样的这个 revenue 或是 revenue 非常少的时候，一定是先跟房东沟通以后，那你如果到时候再不付的话，其实都还可以让房东了解。主要就是要让房东，就是说让他们有心理准备，而不是突然4月1号到4月5号他们没有收到钱的时候，收到房租的时候，他们就会比较 紧张了。给大家一个 statistics 啊，以4月来讲 ，commercial real estate 里面就是办公室还有工业厂房，中大型的房东就是所谓的这个机构投资者还有退休基金，他们所报出来的收租率都达到至少90%。Office 是稍微差一点点，大概在93%到95%。可是，在 industrial real estate 就是工业厂房这些中大型的房东，他们报出来的数据是大概95%到97%。这是4月份的这个数据。5月份应该就是5月1号，所以大家还在等说会不会变得更差，还是会持平。那继续这一页，这个给房东的建议就是说，房东也是必须就是说常常跟房客就是说多多接触，多多联络，才能知道就是说房客的难处在哪里。像 Irvine Company。其实他就蛮主动的，就是说跟他的所有的房客来了解他们的情形。Irvine Company 他们很多的retail 还有 office， 所以对他们来讲是比较 sensitive 一点，因为
它就是在 USB 而已。
因为 Irvine Company 的 holding 大部分就是在office 和 retail 比较多，所以他们会 proactively 就是说很主动的跟所有的房客联络，其实也不是一件坏事。那也是要看什么情况，他才有办法就是说把这个 rent abatement 就是免租能免租多久，那要摊还什么时候摊还多久。那以房东来讲的话，就像刚刚Attorney Jenny 有提到必须就是说对所有的这个法规要非常了解，因为当您是房东的时候，这个法规不了解通常到最后都可能会回来come back to you。另外就是说在文件上面的准备，以房客的角度来讲。当一个房客需要，就是说跟房东要求免租或是减租，或是要怎样摊还这个免租期的这个房租，很多房东都会要求一些文件。那这个文件，房东可能会说，你现在有没有去申请这个 PPP， 或是申请这个 SBA Disaster Loan？ 如果没有的话，房东可能觉得说你不够用心那也就是说你要给房东一个细节，一个明细表，看看就是说你到底从政府那边收到什么样的这个补助。那另外就是说，房客也可以去 claim 这个 insurance。那 business insurance 的话，就是在保险、商业不动产的保险，还有你的这个生意的保险上面 interruption insurance claim。是不是有去申请，还是被这个保险公司给回绝掉了？那另外就是还有可以看如果是做生意的话，如果你有贷款的话，是不是贷款可能这边是你的机械设备的贷款，那机械设备的贷款或者是这种不动产的贷款，看银行方是不是有给这个房客或者是说mortgagee 来做这个一些concession。那其实，在谈合约的时候，现在其实是一个最好的时机，来看看能不能把这个疫情或者说国家紧急状况的这个条款加入这个合约里面。那在这种情况下，最好就是要请这个律师来帮你。在疫情下我相信有很多这个不动产业者，他们很想要知道说他们的这个物业到底是值多少钱。那这个是一个很 simple 的这个公式来算出来你的不动产价值是多少。那 cap rate 就是所谓的 capitalization rate 资本化率。那其实以一个物件1000万来讲的话，如果 return 你的这个投资报酬率是10%，这就代表你的这个净收入是100万，或者是说你要算你的资本化率，你必须要有这个净收入除以不动产资产的价值。可是，在我们这个疫情的情况下，很多业主都知道他的净收益是多少，但是没有办法去知道这个资本化率，所以根本也没有办法就是说知道不动产资产的价值。那这个情况怎么办？资本化率其实有很多方法是可以算出来的，但是也可以从市场上的成交来找出最合理的对你的物业。你的物业可能是一栋办公大楼、一个商场、一个这个出租的工业不动产。但是在我们现在疫情下，很多的这个交易其实都停下来了。资本化率怎么算呢？其实就是说要看一些政府出的一个数据，像现在的这个10年公债的利率才今天我还没忘记看还没看，但是0.6几、0.7% 而已。那以我们现在工业不动产的 Class A 和 Class B 在圣盖博谷的成交的话，大概是在4% 上下。所以如果你有4% 把它摆在这边，你的净收益如果是100万的话，你就可以算出你的不动产价值了。那这个是刚刚中文版的这个资本概率英文。就是这样子，谢谢。
谢谢 Johnson. Thank you, Johnson. I want to remind everyone once again, if you have any questions, text it in the chat box and we'll answer it after Brian Gordon speaks, our final speaker. As you can see, Brian is not Taiwanese American, but I've known Brian for decades, for a long, long time, and he has many, many Taiwanese American clients, and he knows exactly how we think. So Brian is the owner at Lotus Property Services. He's a real estate property manager. Brian worked for a few successful real estate investment firms prior to co-founding Lotus Property Services in 2006. Lotus is a property management firm providing comprehensive multifamily management services, asset management, and investment planning. Lotus currently manages over 2,500 multifamily residential units and over $1 billion of investment real estate. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that. And I'd like to start by saying it's always an honor when you call me a hard-boiled egg. Appreciate that. So let me share my screen here. So my name is Brian Gordon. I own Lotus Property Services. We're a property management company here in the San Gabriel Valley. Like Lisa said, we manage a little over 2,500 units, primarily multifamily properties, but we do have a portfolio of office buildings and shopping centers that we manage. Besides being a broker, I also own a small portfolio of apartments and mobile home parks myself. I've been active speaker for a few of the industry, and I think my best addition I can bring to this webinar today is to give you a pulse on what the market is right now here in the San Gabriel Valley in regards to how tenants are paying rent, things that you can do proactively as an owner, and what will assist you during this unprecedented time with the COVID-19. So I wanted to start off with a few tips or tricks to encourage the tenants to pay their rent. The first thing, our accounting software allows us to track real time how the tenants are paying rent. And we started to fill in the middle of March when things started to heat up regarding COVID. Residents were already calling in worried about how they're going to pay their April rent. So our accounting software actually allowed us, almost like the stock market, to watch the first, second, third day of the month, what a percentage of our tenants were paying. And keep in mind, we manage for individual owners. They're usually mom and pop investors, groups of attorneys, trusts. So these are, individual properties here in the San Gabriel Valley or greater LA. And I think it'll give your audience a real pulse on what's going on in the marketplace. So the first thing I could encourage you is know the current law for your area. Right now, we're getting bombarded left and right daily, just trying to filter the information from various cities that are all passing different ordinances regarding rent restrictions, deferred rent, payment processing, commercial versus residential. So it's important, if you're reviewing your particular building, to make sure that you go to that local ordinance and you find out if there are any more invasive restrictions that have been applied locally besides what is being state mandated or city mandated. So that would be my first recommendation. Second, obviously, communicate with your tenants. We found, and this is the last day of the month, I just looked before I came down here, we were expecting 60, maybe 70% of our collections for the month of April. I really thought it was going to be worse than what it actually was. But as of today, we are 84% of what we were for March. And keep in mind, the 1st of March, most of the people paid their rent. We really didn't have COVID affecting us until the month of April. Lisa, I forgot to put on my timer, so you're going to have to raise your hand when you want me to stop talking. So think of that as 84%. That does include our commercial tenants along with our residential tenants. We found that about 10 to 12% of our tenants right now have filled out those COVID forms. It is a disproportionate share for the commercial properties, especially the retail properties. A lot of the retail ones have taken advantage of the rent deferment. There's not much you can do when their business is completely closed and they're not open and everything. The office buildings, a good proportion, I'd say, around 20% took advantage of that, and even less with the multifamily properties. So I had a feeling that, people would want to attempt to pay their rent, try to keep the house over their head. They would know that this rent is due even when this mandate passes. And if they could afford to pay it, they would pay it. We did see a lot of our, marginal low-income areas here in Los Angeles where maybe the tenants weren't as affluent or financially available to pay their rent. We did see a greater amount of those tenants unable to pay their rent in April. So about 10% of our forms. We'll see what happens in May as this continues on. Obviously, we may have less collections, but 84%, that was our hard number for the end of this month that we collected in comparison to what we normally collect, and we collect millions of dollars every single month for our clients. So communicate with your tenant. There are a lot of forms out there for what you're going to be using with the COVID for your residents. We tweaked our form, and if you give me your email address, I'll give it to you so you can adjust it. One of the things that we did different than the standard forms that are out there is we included a clause that the tenant had to actively fill out if they could pay a portion of the rent or some payment arrangements, rather than just clicking a box, providing some information, and not paying their rent at all in April. So that did turn out, I would say probably 25% of our tenants did attempt to make some type of partial payment or actively commit to a payment plan structure at that time. We are making the tenants fill that out every single month. It would only be for the month of April. Suggest they fill out again in May in case their circumstances have changed. So I really encourage you to do that, because it did turn out for us that a lot of the tenants made partial payments even if they weren't able to pay the whole amount of the rent. This is definitely a time where you want to accept credit card payments, do everything you can to actively collect the rent. That's really important in this time and while you're communicating with the residents. The LA City did roll out earlier this week a rent voucher program. It is kind of exciting. I was hoping rent vouchers for everyone throughout the month of March, but LA City did roll that out. It is for very low income tenants, pays a portion of their rent. It's only available for 3 months at a time. But if you do have a local city that is giving out some type of rent vouchers, find out that information, make sure you have it active for your tenants, and you can give that to your tenants so hopefully they can find some financial relief somewhere else. Encourage payment plans. This is an obvious thing. Our commercial properties, we were even negotiating rent concessions. What I did find with a few of the ones that I personally negotiated is that, you know, the owner may have taken a 20 or 30% reduction in the rent that they anticipated, but that was better to get the money in their hand now than amortize that over the 3-month period that most of the laws have, or even longer in case that's extended. So think about that, you know, work out payment plans. If you have a commercial tenant, you know their business is non-existent right now, you may think of a rent concession in lieu of a partial payment, so you at least get some monies coming in for that. Next, I wanted to talk briefly about vacancies during the pandemic and what to do and when will it stabilize. We really felt this hit in the middle of March as everything started. We had a lot of multifamily residents that even had paid, signed the lease, and backed out of the units for fear of moving around or just being in public. So definitely something to consider. We did have a little minimal activity in April, but it is obviously a very difficult time to rent your vacancies. I wanted to point out this, it reminds me, I foresee, I think over the next year, maybe 2 years, that we may go back to what happened just in our industry in 2008. In 2008, 9, and 10, a lot of our properties had, you know, 10, 12, 15% vacancy. I think we'll see the trajectory of what the rental market will be over the next year, that you'll find people to, you know, consolidate. You know, if they have a 3-bedroom, but they really only need a 2-bedroom, they're likely going to conserve money. If they've lost their job and they want out of their lease, they may be looking to move in with family or friends to save on money while they're going through that financial crisis. So I don't know how long it's going to last. Obviously, you have to have the ability to show the units for somebody to consider moving, but it's really screeched to a halt right now in regards to vacancies. There are a few things that you can do. If you use AppFolio, there are remote lock boxes that you get their information, you give them a code so they can go see the vacancy themselves. You have their financial information, or you have their driver's license information. Definitely do video tours of any vacancy that you have. You know, you save them. It's easy to do a FaceTime showing with somebody that is prospectively looking at one of your vacancies. I encourage you to use all of those keys that you have to help with the showings at this time. Again, not sure about when it will stabilize, but hopefully once the emergency mandate is lifted, then we'll see a spike in activity for the residential and hopefully commercial and office building vacancies. So another key point, since I'm kind of on the pulse, is I wanted to give you the information of what I know regarding our many clients that are looking for bank deferments on their mortgages and what those banks are doing. So we did have some activity in April. A lot of our owners were calling the banks to see if they would offer a deferment. What the information I know, so 4 units or less, you're really looking at a residential type loan. And then 5 units or more, you're looking at a commercial loan. So in the commercial loan spectrum, we did not see much cooperation with the lenders in deferring off or adding those to the end of the mortgages. I did have one client that was successful with Wells Fargo. He has a portfolio of properties. He was able to add his April payment to the end of his loan. I have another one that was with Chase that was able to put a freeze on it, that they would work out a payment plan later for that. Those were the two commercial loans that I knew that there was some type of forgiveness out there with those two lenders. I did hear a lot of it with the residential loans, 4 units or less. What I want you to keep in mind, I personally paid my mortgages this month. I wouldn't want to risk anything for my credit or even something remotely showing as a 30-day delinquent later on to try to capitalize on what's going on in the market right now. But I did hear from a lot of owners that were able to defer off when it is a residential type loan, as you could for your home. So that is definitely out there. I would review the paperwork to make sure that there wouldn't be anything that would go on your credit, because likely if it's 4 units or less, you personally guaranteed it and it's in your name, it's not in a large LLC. Next, I want to go over the common area amenities. Keep them open or close them. You know, my best recommendation is that you close them. Environmental health did close down the pools in most of the cities just for safety precautions with COVID. You already have a lot of residents that are heightened. We've had quite a few cases, positive cases in our properties that we manage.
Yeah, I don't know how I just and like you can tell.
So a lot of the common area amenities, you wouldn't want to put anyone in danger by keeping them open or allow people to not socially distance in your property and may even pose some liability later. So I highly recommend your amenities of the property, go ahead and close them. Maintenance repairs, I also have a maintenance company. It's a sister company that does common area maintenance or you know, apartment building maintenance and construction. That business, you know, came to a screeching halt the last week of March. Residents do not want you going in their units. They don't want to allow a maintenance guy, even if he does have on gloves and masks and everything, to enter the units. So most property management companies are doing emergency services. And then, you know, as the resident calls in, if it warrants something, I'd recommend you use a company that is using the CDC guidelines for, you know, the masks, having Lysol sprayers, you know, everything to protect them and to protect your residents. Residents are very conscious of that right now. Cleaning protocols, dealing with infected tenants. You know, there are HIPAA guidelines. If you have a resident that has tested positive, you cannot disclose, you know, what unit that is, that resident's name. Be very cautious of that. I don't want to put anyone in liability. But you can say that you do have a positive case on the property. So you may want to enact greater cleaning. It really only cleans for that moment in time. But a lot of our residents are very thankful when we put together some proactive cleaning from companies just in the common areas, the elevators, and places that get high traffic zones. That is it for me. I want to thank you. It's an honor to speak, and I'll take it back to Lisa.